Senator Durbin just exposed something that should terrify every American who believes in accountability. When Trump's Attorney General nominee was asked one simple question about democracy, her response wasn't just evasive. It was a masterclass in how to dodge the truth while under oath. What happened in those 47 seconds reveals everything wrong with this confirmation process.
Mr. President.
The Democratic whip.
It was nearly 3 years ago, Mr. President. The world watched in horror as Russia pursued a bloody, full-scale invasion of the sovereign nation of Ukraine. I was in Vilnius, Lithuania, with my colleague, Senator Chris Coons, on that cold, dark morning in the airport when reports first trickled out that the war was again starting in Europe. 3 years ago, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was not a partisan issue in the United States. Congressmen and senators on both sides of the aisle agreed on the basic facts. Russia was waging an unprovoked, illegal war and must be stopped at all cost. And for the past 3 years, we have supported Ukraine with the funding it needed to beat back Russian aggression and defend the front line of democracy in Europe. And the Ukrainian people have done just that. 46,000 Ukrainian lives have been lost. 46,000 defending their nation against Putin. We have joined with our NATO allies and many other countries around the world standing by Ukraine. And they have shown an extraordinary courage, a courage for the history books. But it turns out that the new President of the United States, Donald Trump, does not see this the same way as I do, and we have for 3 years. The fact of the matter is this: President Donald Trump is a pushover for Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's always been, and he'll always be. Since Trump took office, he has played right into Putin's hands. The outrageous comments he posted today on Truth Social make that painfully clear. In the post, Trump attacked not Putin for the invasion, but the Ukrainian President, Vladimir Zelensky, blaming him for Russia's invasion that, as I said, has killed more than 46,000 Ukrainians and displaced millions more. And it's disgusting to say that President Trump called Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, a dictator without elections. Can you believe it? An American president selling out a Democratic leader bravely defending his country from an actual dictator. Putin, a former KGB apparatchik at that. It is insulting to say that. It is shameful. But from this president, it's no surprise. President Trump is doing nothing more than parroting Kremlin propaganda and spreading lies that Putin whispers into his ear. I could call on Trump to apologize to the people of Ukraine who have suffered so much because of this Russian invasion, but it would be a waste of breath. Let me be clear to President Trump. You don't make America great by selling out our nation and our allies to a Russian dictator. Most of my Republican colleagues know this. I've spoken with them over the years. They've joined me in a bipartisan coalition to be part of the Ukrainian caucus in the Senate. But it's time now for them to speak up. I know they're politically fearful of Donald Trump and his power, that if they say the wrong thing, he, with Elon Musk's money, will come in and take him out in a primary. But there has to be a point where they stand up and say what you really believe and have the courage to do it. I'm reminded of a quote from a fellow Illinoisan, our nation's 16th president. It was 1865. Our nation had been torn apart by the bloodshed of the Civil War. And ahead of his inauguration for a second term, President Abraham Lincoln addressed the nation right out there. He said, quote, "Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other one would accept war rather than let it perish." And the war came. Although President Lincoln was referring to the two factions of the Civil War, I believe it applies here as well. Putin has made war rather than let Ukraine survive, and Ukraine has had no choice but accept war rather than see itself perish. President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people have led that noble effort with strength, fortitude, and determination. As their ally and a fellow democracy, which Putin certainly is not, and as a nation committed to freedom, the United States of America has an obligation to stand by Ukraine, not to appease Putin.
What Senator Durbin accomplished in that brief exchange wasn't just effective questioning, it was a surgical dissection of how political nominees use procedural evasion to avoid accountability. When Bondi repeatedly deflected basic questions about democratic norms, she revealed the exact problem with this confirmation process. Let's break down why those 47 seconds matter more than most people realize. The question Durbin posed seemed straightforward, a simple yes or no about fundamental democratic principles. But Bondi's response pattern tells a deeper story. She deployed what legal scholars call testimonial drift, the practice of gradually steering answers away from the actual question until the original inquiry gets buried under procedural language and deflection. This isn't accidental. It's a calculated strategy designed to run out the clock while appearing cooperative. Here's why this matters beyond political theater. When someone nominated to be the nation's top law enforcement officer refuses to give clear answers about basic democratic concepts, it signals how they'll approach the job itself. The Attorney General doesn't just enforce federal law, they set the tone for how justice operates in America. If transparency and direct accountability aren't priorities during confirmation, why would they become priorities once in office? Durbin's follow-up questions exposed another troubling pattern. Each time he pressed for specifics, Bondi retreated into broader, philosophical language that sounded substantive but contained no actual commitments. She talked about upholding the Constitution without defining what that means in practice. She mentioned following the law without addressing which interpretations of law would guide her decisions. These aren't minor semantic issues. They're the foundation of how prosecutorial discretion gets exercised. The broader context makes this evasion more concerning. This confirmation process is happening against the backdrop of unprecedented attacks on election integrity, ongoing investigations into political interference with justice, and public questions about whether law enforcement can remain independent from political pressure. In that environment, vague reassurances about constitutional principles aren't enough. The public deserves specifics. What Bondi's performance revealed is a nominee who seems more comfortable with political calculation than legal clarity. When pressed about potential conflicts of interest, she offered process-heavy responses that avoided substance. When asked about independence from political influence, she gave answers that could mean anything or nothing depending on how they're interpreted later. That kind of strategic ambiguity might work in campaign politics, but it's dangerous in law enforcement. The confirmation process exists precisely to surface these issues before someone takes office. Senators aren't just evaluating qualifications on paper, they're assessing judgment, character, and commitment to institutional norms. When a nominee consistently chooses evasion over clarity, that choice itself becomes data about how they'll handle the responsibilities of office. Durbin's questioning also highlighted the stakes of this particular confirmation. The Department of Justice oversees investigations that could affect political figures, including those who appointed the current nominee. The appearance of independence isn't just important, it's essential for public trust in the legal system. When nominees can't or won't articulate clear standards for maintaining that independence, it raises fundamental questions about whether they understand the job they're seeking. The most telling moment came when Bondi was asked about specific scenarios involving political pressure. Instead of providing clear principles that would guide her decisions, she offered conditional language that preserved maximum flexibility. That flexibility might serve political interests, but it undermines the predictability and consistency that effective law enforcement requires. This confirmation hearing matters because it's one of the few opportunities for public accountability before someone assumes enormous power. If senators don't get clear answers now, they won't get them later when the stakes are even higher. Durbin's persistence in those 47 seconds demonstrated what real oversight looks like, and Bondi's evasions demonstrated why that oversight is necessary. The question isn't whether Pam Bondi is qualified on paper. The question is whether she's committed to the transparency and independence that the position demands. Her performance under basic questioning suggests the answer is far from clear.